The Beatles are forever associated with the ideals of brotherhood, individuality, and innovation in music. Deep emotional tensions existed beneath their polished image, though. The tense dynamic between Paul McCartney and George Harrison was one of the most interesting. Despite the group's apparent cohesion and the adoration of their music from fans, tensions were often simmering beneath the surface. Though the public hardly witnessed it, their partnership and the band's history were forged by subtle frustrations and quiet fights rather than open hatred. At last, George had come clean about the root cause of his animosity for Paul. Not only that, but this information will surprise you and everyone else in the industry. Tribute to George Harisson from the Beatles. George Harrison's life and music are an uplifting account of contemplative strength, personal growth, and incontestable genius. Harisson was born into a working-class household in Liverpool, England on February 25, 1943, and music soon became his obsession. He stood out from the crowd from a young age due to his passion for guitar, and by the time he was a teenager, his classmates had taken notice of his skill and commitment to becoming an expert guitarist. When he teamed up with Paul McCartney and John Lennon in the early 1960s, he became the lead guitarist for a band that would change popular music forever. That talent would change his life. Despite being the youngest member of the Fab Four, Harrison's impact on the band increased over time as he became more proficient and found his own style. In the middle of the 1960s, Harrison started to experiment with different types of music that weren't rock and roll, which was the Beatles' original sound. In a daring decision that would alter the band's trajectory and the landscape of Western popular music, he included Indian music into their sound from 1965 until 1969. His time spent studying the sitar, especially with the renowned Ravi Shankar, improved his playing and broadened the group's creative horizons. The songs he wrote for the Beatles during this time are still some of their most famous compositions. One of the band's most beloved songs, Here Comes the Sun, conveyed warmth and optimism, while My Guitar Gently Weeps demonstrated his lyrical depth and ability to combine emotion with tremendous guitar performance. And with Something, Harrison gave a stunning ballad that made even the critics who had previously disregarded him listen to his genius as a songwriter. Harrison went from being a quiet Beatle to a formidable creative force during this time, producing music that was on par with that of Lennon and McCartney. In 1971, Harrison organized the concert for Bangladesh, showcasing his vision and compassion once again. This New York City event was among the earliest big charity benefit concerts in the history of popular music, featuring an array of renowned artists. Funds and awareness were raised for Bangladesh Liberation War refugees at the concert. Beyond his musical endeavors, Harrison showed a dedication to utilize his celebrity for social good. His ability to combine artistic expression with political action was on full display at the concert, which proved that music could be an effective tool for social change and served as a model for subsequent benefit performances. In 1974, Harrison kept going strong and joined Ravi Shankar on the legendary Dark Horse Tour, an ambitious North American trek. By fusing Eastern and Western traditions in a manner that few major rock artists had dared to do, this tour demonstrated his resolve to spread his adoration of Indian music to a wider audience. It was a watershed point in Harrison's career, even if the tour was controversial because of his strained vocals and the unconventionality of his performances. He had always been distinguished by his artistic path, a desire to take risks and question expectations, and it was evident in this. There was a revival of Harrison's commercial success in the 1980s. Got My Mind Set on You, a catchy tune from his 1988 album Cloud 9, was a huge success. With this album, Harrison was re-established as a major player in popular music and exposed to a whole new audience. Fans welcomed the album as a spectacular comeback, while critics lauded it for its innovative sound. Harrison showed his adaptability and ability to stay relevant during this era. His return was more than just a nod to the heyday of the Beatles, even though tastes in music had changed much since then. His ability to thrive artistically in the face of changing times was demonstrated by this. With fellow legendary musicians Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne, Harrison began a new chapter in his career in the late 1980s and early 1990s when he formed the supergroup the Touring Wilburys. Harrison discovered a collaborative setting that rekindled his love for music production. Fans were reminded of the pure delight that comes from collaboration among equals by the critically praised albums that the trio produced, which were the product of their combined talent and fun personality. The Wilburys' work provided another evidence of Harrison's talent for blending and yet maintaining his individuality. Around the same time, Harrison was involved with the enormous Beatles anthology project, which looked back at the band's career and gained him recognition for the first time. Harrison helped keep the Beatles' legacy alive through interviews, recordings, and introspection. He gave his take on the band's rise and fall and made sure that subsequent generations could appreciate the significance of their music, the trials, seizures, assaults, and diseases that George endured. Many people view George Harrison's legacy through the prism of his spirituality, his artistic abilities, and his persona as the subtle Beatle, whose music possessed a unique combination of richness and grace. Harrison took solace in music and life, but his tale also included darker parts, times of difficulty and controversy, typical of great artists. Despite his remarkable accomplishments, his journey was not without its share of challenges, both public and private. Looking at both Harrison's professional successes and the hardships he faced is necessary for a complete understanding of him. The guy behind the music can be better understood in light of these scandals and issues, which show his vulnerability, perseverance, and ability to face obstacles that would have broken others. It was in the years after Harrison had established himself as a solo artist, rather than during the height of Beatlemania in the 1960s, that he was embroiled in perhaps the most infamous dispute of his career. His 1970 album, All Things Must Pass, featured the song My Sweet Lord, which went on to become an international hit. Harrison had his moment of glory as a songwriter when its inspiring melody and spiritual message won over audiences all around the globe. Its success, though, was soon eclipsed by a case that would trouble him for decades. Claiming that Harrison's 1971 single My Sweet Lord was a rip-off of the Chiffon's 1971 single He's So Fine, penned by Ronnie Mac, Bright Tunes Music sued Harrison. Relying heavily on the assertion that any resemblances were accidental, Harrison's defense prolonged the case for years. In the end, the court decided that Harrison had plagiarized in a way that was described as subconscious plagiarism, which meant that he hadn't intentionally copied the tune, but had accidentally used it in his own song. People had mixed feelings about the verdict. Some thought it was fair, while others thought it unfairly penalized Harrison for an accident that any songwriter working in the limited melodic range of popular music may have. A personal and artistic setback, the lawsuit hit Harrison hard. The irony of having his most personal hit turned into a legal struggle was excruciating, given the close relationship between music and his spiritual path. With a duration longer than average copyright battles, Harrison was left to endure the annoyance for decades as the lawsuit persisted into the 1990s. Even while My Sweet Lord is still a cherished song, it will always be associated with one of the longest and most contentious legal battles in music history. Even though Harrison was already vexed by legal fights, a far more personal catastrophe occurred decades later that truly shook him. A disturbed intruder brutally interrupted the peaceful life he had established at his home, Friar Park, in 1999. The intruder assaulted Harrison after breaking into the house, inflicting several knife wounds on him. The abrupt escalation of violence was unexpected for a guy who had dedicated a significant portion of his life to seeking serenity and spiritual foundation. Harrison was lucky to escape the invader alive because his wife Olivia acted heroically and swiftly, striking him with a lamp and fighting him off until the authorities came. Harrison suffered both physical and mental injuries as a result of the incident. A haven away from the stresses of fame, Friar Park had been his refuge. However, not even at home did I feel completely secure following the incident. The invasion proved that famous people, no matter how private they made their lives, are nonetheless susceptible to random threats. As the story revealed the ugly side of fame, the danger of obsession and violence from strangers, it shocked fans and the general public. The incident served as a sobering reminder to Harrison, who treasured his privacy and frequently sought to avoid the limelight, that his popularity might invade his life in the most horrifying ways. In the late 1990s, he faced the test of violence, and at the same time, he also faced the test of major health problems. The throat cancer that Harrison was diagnosed with in 1997 was a direct result of his long history of smoking. He seemed to be on the mend after undergoing treatment, but his health problems persisted. Harrison was already dealing with two cancers, lung and brain, when the new millennium rolled around. Even while word got out fast, Harrison frequently downplayed or disputed claims that his illness was worse than it actually was. The frailty of even the most venerated personalities was laid bare in these last years of sickness. Those who had long held Harrison in high esteem as a symbol of inner peace were suddenly faced with the truth of his frailty. But he kept his composure and dignity even while he battled cancer. He was a musician and a truth seeker at heart, and he never let his sickness define him. Harrison handled the difficult situation with the same quiet determination that had always defined him, despite the fact that the public wanted updates and he wanted seclusion. In the end, his fight with cancer became a poignant and personal part of his life story, revealing that bravery in the face of mortality was behind his songs and popularity. Even before these problems, though, Harrison had been in the middle of controversy while still associated with the Beatles. The police formally conducted a narcotics search of his residence in 1969. Harrison was accused with drug possession after authorities allegedly discovered hashish on the home. However, doubts regarding the raid's veracity persisted from the very beginning. There were rumors that someone was trying to accuse him by planting the narcotics. The debate mirrored the atmosphere of suspicion surrounding rock musicians in the late 1960s, a time when counterculture figures were often pursued by the police, even when no conclusive evidence surfaced. John and Paul McCartney's quarrymen to the legacy of Paul McCartney. It all started for Paul McCartney on June 18, 1942, when he came into this world in Liverpool, England. His early devotion to music, nurtured in a working-class household, would come to define his entire life and career. From an early age on, Paul was able to confidently pursue songwriting and performance thanks to his father's encouragement of his musical abilities. He owes a great deal of his early musical orientation to the multicultural metropolis of Liverpool. In this setting, McCartney laid the groundwork for what would later become her iconic status around the world. Meeting John Lennon at a local fair on July 6, 1957, while Lennon was performing with his ska band The Quarrymen, was a watershed moment for McCartney. The destiny of music was about to be altered by this meeting. McCartney's guitar skills and musical acumen won over Lennon, and he joined the band without hesitation. In what would turn out to be the Beatles' formative years, Lennon and McCartney formed one of the most groundbreaking songwriting partnerships of the 20th century. They created the groundwork for an extraordinary musical adventure by complementing and challenging one another. In the early 60s, the Fab Four became famous. However, tensions and creative differences among the group intensified as the decade went on. Paul McCartney formally announced his departure from the Beatles on April 10, 1970, as a result of these issues. As a result of his announcement, the band's separation was officially confirmed, shocking fans all around the world. The decision was freeing and challenging for McCartney. This marked the end of a remarkable era in music history and allowed him to embark on new solo endeavors. Paul McCartney began his solo career soon after he left the Beatles. He debuted as a solo artist in 1970 with the publication of McCartney, an autobiographical album that displayed his range and talent. The next year, in 1971, he and Linda McCartney co-founded Ram. With these two albums, McCartney began to establish himself as an artist apart from the Beatles, demonstrating that he could still succeed in the music industry. In a move that seamlessly integrated family and talent, McCartney and Linda soon founded the band Wings, enabling McCartney to keep composing music while performing alongside his partner. With Wings and other projects, McCartney persisted throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s. He became even more entrenched in popular music as a result of the band's chart-topping success and their streak of songs. During this time, McCartney demonstrated his capacity to adapt to shifting musical environments by refining his sound without sacrificing the melodic finesse that had always characterized his songwriting. Throughout this time, he consistently produced work which showcased his commitment to his profession and his ability to juggle stardom with family life with Linda and their children. The late 80s and early 90s saw McCartney shifting his attention from solo work to collaborations. His musical palette was broadened and his audience reached through his collaborations with many musicians. At the same time, he was able to re-establish a connection to his past by contributing to the Beatles anthology project, which brought the band's tale to a younger audience. Thanks to the commercial and critical success of the anthology, the world was reminded of the group's lasting influence, and McCartney was able to pay tribute to his friendship with Lennon, George Harisson, and Ringo Starr. McCartney's durability in an ever-changing industry is demonstrated by his flourishing career that persisted well into the 21st century. Noteworthy solo albums, like New, 2013, and McCartney 3, 2020, were released by him between 2013 and 2020. Despite having been in the music industry for decades, he managed to keep his creativity and relevance alive on both albums. Fans were given a rare glimpse into his lyrical approach and introspective thoughts in his memoir-style book, Lyrics 1956, Present, which he released in 2021. This was McCartney's way of honoring his career while also letting fans in on the personal stories that inspired his music. No symptoms of slowing down have been observed in McCartney, even in his latter years. Returning to the road in 2022 and 2023, he wowed crowds with sets that spanned his whole career on the Got Back tour. His incredible enthusiasm and love for live performance shone through at these concerts, which also demonstrated the enduring devotion his fans have for his music. Concurrently, McCartney was a part of one of the most momentous events in the modern era of the Beatles, working with the band on the song Now and Then that brought them back together using a combination of archival recordings and contemporary technology. Recognizing the enduring significance of the Beatles and McCartney's contribution in keeping their legacy alive, the track won a Grammy for Best Rock Performance. AI Wars, McCartney's Incarceration, Orchestras, Song Lyrics, and more. Paul McCartney has achieved phenomenal success during his career. However, it has also been fraught with controversy, as is typical of artists who have spent a significant portion of their lives in the spotlight. While these events may have been awkward at times, they shed light on his complicated path as a musician and a public figure. In doing so, they shed light on the difficulties of adapting to new eras, cultural norms, and individual decisions, in addition to the scrutiny that accompanies celebrity. When seen in context with his accomplishments, these scandals reveal McCartney as a guy who skillfully navigates the tension between being creative and being accountable for his actions. His 1980 Tokyo marijuana possession arrest was one of the most high-profile scandals involving McCartney. He was immediately detained after customs officers found the narcotic in his luggage upon his arrival. The 9-day imprisonment of McCartney in Japan startled and outraged fans across the world who had been eagerly anticipating his concerts. Aside from the personal fallout, the arrest had a professional impact by canceling Wings Japan tour, which was a huge letdown for all the fans who had bought tickets. This episode was one of the most embarrassing and distracting in McCartney's otherwise fruitful career, and it marked a turning point in his troubled legal history. The detention in Japan was also symbolically significant. Given Japan's stringent drug restrictions, many found it hard to believe that McCartney, of all people, would take such a chance. Critics said his actions betrayed the innocent persona he had worked so hard to establish, particularly after the Beatles disbanded, and the episode sparked discussions over musicians' roles as public figures. Some saw it as a holdover from the counterculture of the 1960s, when drug experimenting was more acceptable. Regardless of one's perspective, the arrest brought attention to the conflict between McCartney's personal decisions and his highly public image. When McCartney published Give Ireland Back to the Irish in 1972, it caused a different type of controversy. This was many years ago. The song made its political position known when it was written in reaction to Bloody Sunday, when unarmed protesters in Northern Ireland were shot and killed by British troops. Its demand that the Irish people regain control of Northern Ireland was unequivocal and straightforward. Due to its obviously political lyrics, the BBC swiftly banned the song. But for McCartney, the song was an outcry for injustice and a demonstration of his desire to use his fame for social justice. The significance of the song was unaffected by its banishment. Contrarily, the censorship increased the track's visibility and further established McCartney as an artist who fearlessly spoke his opinions, even in the face of criticism. This incident also prompted broader discussions regarding the function of artists in political debates and the potential or necessity of using music as a tool for political engagement. When McCartney felt the need to speak out, he was willing to risk losing his mass appeal for a cause he believed in, as shown in Give Ireland Back to the Irish. The release of McCartney's B-side, Big Boys Bickering, in the 1990s sparked further controversy over the artist. The track's controversial nature stems from the artist's unusual and unexpected decision to use profanity, which is typically associated with his more melodic and family-friendly music. Many listeners and reviewers were taken aback by the song's direct language, which ignited conversations over creative liberty and the limits of acceptable lyrics. In McCartney's mind, the song was an opportunity to make a bold statement. The public's reaction to Big Boys Bickering represented the conflict between McCartney's long-established image and his willingness to experiment or tackle themes in fresh ways, even when it undermined their picture of him as a relatively clean-cut figure. Some thought the vulgarity was unnecessary, but others thought it was a nice change of pace that McCartney still wasn't afraid to break with convention, even after all these years. Even when the music isn't the main focus, the incident showed how audiences have high expectations of musicians and how controversy may ensue when those expectations aren't met. The criticism of McCartney has extended beyond individual songs to include any references to his native tongue. In his older years, he freely admitted to using racially insensitive slurs, which were commonplace at the time when he was younger. By tackling the subject head-on, McCartney portrayed his actions, which he did not justify, as a reflection of the era's ignorance. In addition to highlighting the evolution of social consciousness over the years, he acknowledged the damage that such rhetoric does. The wider discussion on accountability and cultural change included McCartney as a result of these confessions. Many people respected his candor because it demonstrated a readiness to learn from his mistakes and face the future head-on. Concurrently, it served as a reminder to the general public that not even well-known people can escape the biases of their day. He contributed to a broader conversation by sharing his thoughts on how people might overcome prejudice and how a society deals with its history. More and more, McCartney has been arguing about the effects of technology on artists in recent years. Concerned that AI businesses would be able to use creative works without paying the original creators, he spoke out against planned changes to UK copyright laws in 2025. Such rules, McCartney said, might be harmful to creativity and endanger the jobs of writers, musicians, and other artists. His position demonstrated his continuous involvement in supporting the rights of individuals employed in the creative sectors, in addition to his vocation as an artist. As to why Harisson and McCartney had their disagreement, the music and cultural effects of George Harrison's tenure with the Beatles are enduringly lauded. However, behind the scenes, resentment was building, notably between Paul McCartney and Harisson. Harisson often felt like an unheard sidekick, unable to make his voice heard among the limelight surrounding the band's creative cooperation between McCartney and Lennon. A long-lasting disagreement within the Beatles stemmed from his dissatisfaction, particularly with McCartney's method of leadership and control. Both the studio environment and Harrison's sense of self within the context of one of the most iconic bands of all time were impacted by these conflicts. When Brian Epstein, the Beatles' manager, passed away in 1967, the situation deteriorated rapidly. In Epstein's absence, McCartney took the reins as creative leader, dictating the direction and speed of the band's efforts. Although it appeared to be natural leadership to others, Harisson felt even more marginalized by it. It was at this point that he started to feel inferior to McCartney and Lennon, whose ideas and music frequently eclipsed his own. Because Harisson was finally starting to make his mark as a songwriter and thinker, but was still treated as a junior member of the group, the change was especially discouraging for him. After 1967's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band recording, Harrison's sense of alienation only grew. Harisson only had a single track, Within You, Without You, on the album, despite its widespread acclaim as a classic. Harisson confessed he no longer cared about being fabulous, just as McCartney's grand plan was taking the band into uncharted experimental ground. His breakthrough as a songwriter came a year ago when he battled hard to get 3 of his songs on Revolver, reducing Sgt. To a single track. Disillusioned and at odds with McCartney's direction for the band, Harisson believed that Pepper was a step backward. Harisson began to look for sources of inspiration outside from the Beatles in the late 1960s. Spending time in upstate New York with Bob Dylan and the other musicians who would form the band gave him a renewed feeling of camaraderie and teamwork. Harisson respected Dylan's circle for the way its members collaborated without interference and gave each other free rein. Back in London, he wished the Beatles may take a page out of this egalitarian playbook. On the contrary, he was once again forced to deal with McCartney's strong will, particularly in the realms of composition and arrangement. Harisson felt a deep sense of letdown. In sharp contrast to the authoritarian studio dynamic at home, he had relished the community vibe in America. During the sessions that would later become Let It Be, the tension reached its highest point. The project's original steward, engineer, and producer Glenn Johns went on to state in Graham Thompson's biography of George Harisson that the shut door created an extremely awkward atmosphere. It was terrible to be there when this started, and then again right after it happened. As McCartney's authority gradated against Harrison's quest for autonomy and respect, John's statements summed up the pressure that had become apparent among the band members. Pattie Boyd, who was Harrison's wife at the time, also gave an honest account of life at home. She went into detail about how miserable Thompson was in an interview she conducted with him for that very book. The Beatles' incessant bickering made him sad. When they were fighting, they were brutal. Because he had recently discovered a spiritual path that was particularly distressing for him. He was marginalized, like an underappreciated sibling. After a long day of recording, he would return home furious. According to Boyd, Harrison's serious mental illness was a direct result of his feud with McCartney and the other members of the Beatles. The core issue was crystal evident for Boyd. Her statement underscored that there was a collision of human dynamics in addition to artistic issues, saying, "George saw Paul as difficult. They would tolerate each other, but I think George basically didn't like Paul's personality. I just think they really didn't love each other." There was a noticeable lack of mutual warmth in Harisson and McCartney's connection. in contrast to the close and creatively charged relationship that Lennon and McCartney shared. Harrison left the band during the recording of Let It Be as a result of the strain. Although his exit was abrupt, it conveyed a strong statement regarding the impact of his surroundings on him. There were stipulations attached to his return agreement. The chilly Twickenham studios would give way to a warmer location for the Beatles. If McCartney wanted to rein down his domineering behavior, he might bring in keyboardist Billy Preston to level the playing field. Although they were short-term fixes, they did enable the band to keep performing. The year came to a close for the Beatles when Lennon announced his own departure, effectively ending their run. Harrison continued to show how uncomfortable he was with McCartney in his remarks even after the band broke up. In retrospect, he made the astute comment, "I couldn't join a band with Paul McCartney, but it's nothing personal." This statement revealed a lot about Harrison. He didn't hate McCartney per se, but he did realize that he couldn't work directly with him again. Even though Harrison was cautious to express it without malice, the line highlighted how their working relationship had been defined by friction. The 1970 release of All Things Must Pass by Harrison was a powerful affirmation of his long-standing sense of being overshadowed. The ambitious and wide-ranging triple album revealed the Beatles' previously untapped depth of composition. My Sweet Lord and What Is Life are just two examples of Harrison's musical prowess that demonstrated his boundless creative energy, which he had been holding in reserve for some time. The album's success, it outsold his former comrades' individual albums, was an emphatic statement. There was always more to Harrison than the hushed Beatle, and suddenly everyone could hear it. Despite his animosity toward the Beatles, Harrison miraculously refrained from completely erasing his past. According to George Harisson on George Harisson Interviews and Encounters, he discussed the possibility of a Beatles reunion at a press conference in 1974 for his Dark Horse tour. "This is just a dream." Regarding the possibility of reuniting the Beatles, he stated, "If we ever do that, the reason will be that we are all broke. I'd rather have Willie Weeks on bass than Paul McCartney." This statement accurately portrays his feelings. Honesty and a touch of humor were in Paul's statements, and I respect that. However, even after all these time had passed since the band split, they still showed no signs of wanting to work musically with McCartney again.